And now we're going to move on to the bottom line. We're going to cover the top story of the day, which is that of Poland's government spending and the impact that that has on the country and in particular the region. And I'm delighted to now welcome Ignacy Morawski, who is the chief economist at Puls Biznesu. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Yes, thank you for joining us once again on our show. So we know that the Ministry of Defense announced this week that it intends to boost its defense spending. Again, we're looking at figures of 4.2, 4.5% of GDP in 2025. And I want to unpack the impact of this potential decision for Poland, but not only for Poland, because this will obviously impact the region as well. And I wanted to begin with the initial question. Can Poland actually afford this spending? Does Poland not have other pressing domestic priorities?
Well, I think we have to spend money on defense, and this is the top priority. So the question is probably not whether we can afford it, but how to organize the budget so that we can afford it. I don't think that we are going to face an increased spending rate on defense next year, because the rate of spending on that purpose is already very high. It's between 4.5% and 5% of GDP, depending on
how you calculate
how do you account for spending for various categories in the budget. But in general, it is very high, and it will probably stay high. And now the question is whether we will have to cut other spending or increase taxes, right? So that will be one option. And the second option would be to go with increased deficit, right? So we can keep the deficit increased for a couple of years. Now, the first option, to cut other spending and increase taxes, is obviously very difficult politically. Next year, we have presidential elections, which are strategically important for the governing coalition. And I don't think that we will face any serious fiscal measures in 2025, like increased taxes or cut spending. So we have another option, which is increased deficit. And here the challenge is the fiscal rules of the European Union. So the European Commission has started to push Poland to cut the deficit and is threatening to use the excessive deficit procedure. So we are between two challenges, but in the end I think that we will stay with increased deficit for a couple more years and count on the fact that maybe European Commission will not punish Poland for that, because it has actually never punished anybody in Europe for breaching the fiscal rules.
Well, you see, there are a number of economic factors that seem to suggest that Poland is heading in a positive direction overall. Various economists that we've brought in here have spoken rather positively in terms of Poland's economic outlook. In terms of the geopolitical situation, it would suggest that Poland needs to invest in its defense spending. Increasing taxes is never an attractive option for your average private citizen. And as you mentioned, we have the presidential elections that are coming up, and then we have this excessive deficit procedure. Do you think that because of where Poland is positioned on the map and its exposure to Russia, and also because of the eastern flank, do you think that Poland will get a little bit more leeway when it comes to the fact that it does have a rather high debt?
Do you mean leeway in negotiations with European Commission,
yes.
Excessive deficit procedure?
Indeed, yes.
Yes, indeed, I think it will. First, we are in a very specific circumstances. So I think that we need to face the abrupt increase in military spending. And there is one factor that I've already mentioned, but I would like to repeat it and emphasize it. European Commission and European Union Council, or Council of the European Union, have never punished anybody for breaching fiscal rules. So punishing Poland would be very strange.
So what is
now,
the
Romania,
purpose? What is the purpose of this procedure in that case?
Well, I think the procedure is quite important for Eurozone countries because they share the common currency. So they need to they also share the risks, right? So within the Eurozone, when one country goes bankrupt, obviously other countries feel the repercussions and need actually to bail out this country. So within the Eurozone, there has to be some common fiscal framework. That's understandable. However, Poland is not in the Eurozone, so I don't think that we need to have the same very strict rules as countries as important as France or Italy. Now we have an interesting case of Romania, because Romania might be the first country which will be somehow punished for breaching the excessive deficit procedure. So it will be the interesting case to observe how European Commission behaves, what are the decisions of the Council of the European Union, and we will be able to draw conclusions within a couple of months from that. But in general, I suppose that we will not be punished for breaching the deficit rules unless the excess deficit is very high, right? So we have this limit of 3% for the deficit. If we stay with the deficit between 4 and 5% of GDP, or even closer to 4%, I think that we can go on with that. If we go to 6% or 7%, then the story would be different, right? But in general, I suppose that you're right, that we will be, that the European Commission will be somehow lenient towards Poland.
Okay, assuming that that is the case, how long can we sustain this sort of level? 4%?
Yeah, 4 or 5%.
Without getting too excessive.
Yeah, I think actually the most important parameter here is economic growth. If Poland keeps growing at the rate of 3 to 4% in real terms, then I think that we can maintain the deficit even close to the current levels for many years. Because actually what counts for the fiscal stability in the long term is the economic growth, right? So if the country is dynamic and has good economic perspectives, then investors are much more willing to buy bonds, government bonds, and finance the spending. So if we maintain growth rate at around 3-4% in real terms, annual growth rate, then I suppose that we can have, for a couple of years, an increased deficit. Obviously, not indefinitely. In the end, we need to stabilize the deficit and debt. But I mean, for, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years, we can stay with increased deficit. However, if the growth rate is slower, then I think the situation will be much more challenging.
But your assessment of the situation that you've described, do you think that this is realistic?
You mean realistic?
This growth rate, you know, encouraging investors.
Well, I think that we are somewhere on the verge.
It could go either way.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we have advantages, and Polish economy has performed very well for the last 5 or even 10 years. However, now we face some new difficulties, like much stronger currency, different growth model needed from exporters, lower inflow of immigrants, less capacity to increase domestic spending on investments or other purposes, higher interest rates, right? So 5 years up until COVID, real interest rates were negative, both in Poland as in Western Europe. Now real interest rates are positive, and it is much more difficult to achieve a very high economic growth rate with high interest rates. So I think there are many challenges which will be, I would say, an obstacle on the path to high growth. So we will see. The next year is very interesting because we've already passed the trough in the business cycle. We are on the acceleration phase in terms of GDP, and we will see what level of GDP growth we will attain within 2 to 3 quarters. That will tell us whether we can go back to 3-4% growth, which will be positive. The closer to 4%, the better. And there are many economists who believe that we can grow at 4% over the next 2 to 3 years. Or the next scenario, much worse, obviously, is that we will stay with a growth at around 2 or 3%. And that will be challenging for the government. So the next couple of quarters will be very, very interesting.
Okay, Ignacy Morawski, Chief Economist at Puls Biznesu, thank you so much. I was hoping for some more yes or no answers from you, but it's a very complex topic indeed. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And that brings us to the end of today's edition of Business Arena. Make sure you join us every day from next week at 5 o'clock on TVP World. Goodbye.